A 19-year-old girl standing in a room full of the most powerful business minds in the world told them that she could change medicine with a single drop of blood. She did not ask for their trust. She demanded it. In the last decade, we have watched the medical industry promise a future of personalized, painless, and instant diagnostics, yet the reality for most patients remains a long wait in a sterile room, a needle in the arm, and a week-long delay for results. The gap between that promise and that reality is where fraud lives. It is not a shadow in the corner. It is the light in the window. We believe we are safe because we have regulators, because we have the press, and because we have the law. But what happens when those very institutions are seduced by the narrative of a young genius? What happens when the machinery of justice is too slow to catch the speed of a billion-dollar lie? This is not just a story about a failed startup. It is a story about how we let a myth grow so large that it crushed the truth. And to understand how that happened, we have to look at the moment the machine started to break. Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford in 2003, leaving behind the safety net of a degree to chase a vision of lab-on-a-chip technology. She had an idea for a wearable patch that could adjust drug dosages and monitor blood variables, but she quickly pivoted to a broader mission. She wanted to make blood tests cheaper, more convenient, and accessible to consumers. The name she chose, Theranos, was a portmanteau of therapy and diagnosis. It sounded scientific. It sounded clean. By December of 2004, she had raised $6 million. The money was flowing. The investors were not just writing checks, they were writing history. They were building a monument to a girl who had not yet learned that biology does not care about your ambition. The core claim was simple enough to be believable. Theranos claimed to have developed a compact automated device that could run dozens of blood tests using only a small sample of blood. No vials. No massive machines. Just a tiny device that could sit in a grocery store or a pharmacy. This was the hook. It was the promise that you could check your thyroid or your cholesterol while buying milk. It was a future that felt just out of reach, which is exactly why people reached for it. And because the promise was so seductive, the scrutiny was low. The board of directors included former secretaries of state, retired military generals, and senators. This was not a normal board. This was a Hall of Fame. And when a Hall of Fame backs a company, the public stops asking questions. They start believing the answer. But belief is a fragile thing. It requires evidence. And evidence is hard to find when the technology does not exist. By 2013, Theranos had raised more than $700 million from venture capitalists and private investors. Their valuation peaked at $9 billion. That is a number that defies logic for a company that is supposed to be running blood tests in a closet. But the narrative was strong. The narrative said that Holmes was the next Steve Jobs of healthcare. The narrative said that the old ways of medicine were slow and cumbersome, and Theranos was the savior. So, when Safeway invested $350 million in 2012 to retrofit 800 locations with clinics for in-store blood tests, the market cheered. It felt like the future had arrived. It felt like the barrier to entry for good health had been dismantled. Then came Walgreens. In 2013, they partnered with Theranos to offer tests at more than 40 locations. The partnerships were expanding. The machine was working. But the tests in those 40 stores were not running on Theranos machines. Behind the scenes, the gears were grinding against each other. The technology was not doing what it was supposed to do. The devices were not running the tests. They were running nothing. Or worse, they were running old, clunky machines that looked like they belonged in a hospital from the 1980s, hidden behind a sleek front panel. This is where the story turns from a triumph into a tragedy. Because when a company is this big, and the board is this powerful, the truth does not just disappear. It was walking out the door every week, in the resumes of the employees who kept quitting. Then someone started digging. In 2015, a journalist named John Carreiro for the Wall Street Journal started to notice something odd. The stories from inside the company did not match the stories being told to the public. Employees were leaving in droves. They were speaking in whispers. They were saying that the tests were inaccurate. They were saying that patients were getting wrong diagnoses. They were saying that the company was using standard laboratory equipment, not the proprietary technology they had promised. Kuriru went to the source. He talked to former employees. He looked at the data. And what he found was not a minor discrepancy. It was a complete fabrication. The compact devices did not work. The small sample size did not work. The accuracy did not work. The entire foundation of the $9 billion empire was built on sand. But here is the thing about sand. It holds up until it doesn't. The revelation in 2015 was not just a news item. It was a detonation. The Wall Street Journal's investigation was just the first crack in the dam. Soon, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, stepped in. They are the federal agency that certifies clinical laboratories. They looked at Theranos' main laboratory and they found grave deficiencies. They found that the tests were not reliable. They found that the quality control was non-existent. As a result, they revoked the certification for Theranos' main lab. 1 second. I am pausing the story, and I will come back, I promise. Millionmarkers exists to pull the thread on empires built on sand and a very good lawyer. Subscribe, because the next file we crack open has the same quiet, smiling villain. And it hits harder. Back to that lab, though, because the morning CMS slid that revocation letter across the table, Theranos had exactly 48 hours to decide whether to fight or to start quietly shredding documents. They fought. It did not matter. Without that certification, Theranos could not legally operate as a clinical lab. The fallout was immediate and violent. Safeway, which had invested $350 million, terminated its deal. Walgreens, which had been a proud partner, pulled out. In 2016, Walgreens filed a suit in federal court in Delaware, seeking $140 million in damages for breach of contract. The partners were not just angry. They were betrayed. They'd surrendered their money and their reputation, and all they got back was a lie. But the money she kept, Elizabeth Holmes's personal net worth, had been estimated at $4.5 billion. She was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in history. But as the truth came out, that number began to evaporate. By June of 2016, Forbes estimated that her net worth had dropped from $4.5 billion to nothing. Zero. The billionaire was gone. The genius was gone. What was left was a shell of a company, a pile of lawsuits, and a woman who had lost everything she had built. The company was dissolved in September of 2018. But the story was not over. The legal machine, which is slow and deliberate, had finally caught up to the speed of the fraud. In 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, charged Holmes and former company president Sunny Balwani with fraud. The SEC's real target wasn't the cash, it was the lie. They alleged Holmes and Balwani deliberately misled investors on the tech's actual power. A dream. It never existed. Period. The trial was a spectacle. It was a courtroom drama that played out for years. Then the jury came back. Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Sunny Balwani was convicted on all 12 counts brought against him. The judge sentenced Holmes to 135 months in prison. That is more than 11 years. For a 19-year-old who started a company to save lives, the end was a prison cell. So why does this matter to you? It matters because the wrong numbers did not stay in the lab. They went home with real patients, inside real diagnoses. It shows us that when we worship genius, we stop thinking. We stop asking questions. We let the narrative override the evidence. We let the board of directors become a shield instead of a safeguard. Theranos is not just a cautionary tale. It is a mirror. And the next Theranos is not a hypothesis. Somewhere right now, an investor is hearing the word single drop of blood, with a different product attached. It is in the next startup that promises to cure cancer with a pill, in the next company that promises to feed the world with a single seed, in the next genius who stands in front of a crowd and says, I have solved it. We want healthcare to be easy, fast, and cheap, and when someone promises us exactly that, we want to believe it. That desire is human. It is understandable. It is also dangerous. The tragedy of Theranos is not that the technology failed. The tragedy is that the truth was ignored for so long, that it had to be dragged out by a journalist and a regulator. The truth was not hidden by force. It was hidden by belief. And that is the most dangerous kind of hiding. The lesson is not that we should stop believing in innovation. The lesson is that we must never let the promise become more important than the proof. Because when we do not just lose money. We lose trust. And trust is the foundation of our healthcare, our markets, and every story this channel opens. So when that moment comes, the crowd, the promise, the miracle, be the one who asks the question no one else is asking. Because if you do not, someone else will answer it for you. And that answer will arrive too late. The blood is still on the floor. The machines are still silent. Because the next story is not about a girl from Stanford. It is about us, about our willingness to look away, and our willingness to believe. So the next time you hear a pitch that sounds too good to be true, stop, listen, and look for the cracks. Because the next pitch will not sound like a lie.